Let's dive into one of the most famous and frankly one of the spookiest legends in all of history, the curse of King Tutankhamun. It's an incredible story of ancient kings, fabulous treasure, and a deadly revenge that supposedly reached out from beyond the grave. This is it, the warning, the words that were supposedly carved above the entrance to King Tut's tomb. This single sentence is what kicked off a worldwide panic and created a legend that still gives people chills 100 years later. And this number? Well, this number is what made everyone believe the curse was real. In just the first few years after the tomb was opened, 22 people, all connected to the discovery in some way, died under mysterious or untimely circumstances. So where does this all start? Well, the story of the curse really begins with its very first and most famous victim, the man who bankrolled the whole operation. Only a few months after he stepped inside that tomb, Lord Carnarvon was dead. But here's the thing. It wasn't just that he died that caught everyone's attention. It was the series of bizarre, almost unbelievable things that happened at the very moment of his death. I mean, you can see why this became a huge story, right? The lights across all of Cairo just go out. At the same instant, his dog back home in England just howls and drops dead. And the cherry on top, Howard Carter's pet canary had been eaten by a cobra, the literal symbol of the pharaoh's power. For the media, this wasn't a coincidence. This was a message. And it didn't stop with Lord Carnarvon. Oh no, the list just kept growing. A financier who visited the tomb, dead. The radiologist who x-rayed the mummy, dead. Even Carnarvon's secretary. With every new death, the legend of the curse got bigger and bigger, and the world became totally convinced that some dark magic was at work. And then this. This was the detail that seemed to seal the deal. A mark on the mummy, over 3,000 years old, in the exact same place as the infected mosquito bite that killed Lord Carnarvon. How do you even explain that? It felt like the pharaoh was leaving his signature on his victim. Okay, so that's the scary part of the story. But to really understand what happened, we need to rewind a bit. Because before all the tragedy and the talk of curses, there was this moment of pure triumph, arguably the greatest discovery in the history of archaeology. And at the center of it all were these two men, a real odd couple. You had Howard Carter, this obsessive, mostly self-taught archaeologist, and then you had his money man, Lord Carnarvon, a super-rich British earl who was funding Carter's dream. Now, you have to understand, the pressure was insane. For 15 years, Carnarvon had been pouring money into this search, and they had found absolutely nothing. He finally told Carter, look, you've got one more season, one last shot. If you don't find it, we're done. And then they found a step. That step led to a staircase, which led to a sealed door. Carter carefully made a tiny hole, lit a candle, and peered inside. As his eyes adjusted, he just went completely silent. Behind him, an impatient Lord Carnarvon finally blurted out, "Can you see anything?" And Carter's response has gone down in history. And wonderful was the understatement of the century. We're talking about 5,398 priceless objects, a death mask made of more than 22 pounds of solid gold, a dagger literally forged from the iron of a meteorite, an entire treasure trove untouched for 3,000 years. But as the world celebrated this incredible find, the whispers of a curse were just getting started. So that is one heck of a ghost story, isn't it? But now, let's do what the newspapers of the 1920s didn't bother to do. Let's pull back the curtain and actually look at the evidence. This is where the legend starts to fall apart. So let's start with the foundation of the whole story, that terrifying warning we talked about at the beginning. Did Howard Carter and his team actually find that inscription? The answer is nope, not at all. There was no clay tablet, no inscription, nothing. The truth is, a journalist made the whole thing up. He kept asking the team about curses, they kind of joked around with him, and he just ran with it and invented the story. The most famous curse in the world was born out of a reporter's imagination. Okay, so if the curse itself was a fake, what about all those other spooky coincidences? Well, once you remove the superstition from the equation and apply a little bit of science, they start to look a lot less supernatural. Let's break it down. That citywide blackout in Cairo? Yeah, turns out power cuts happened almost every single day back then. The dog dying at the same time? Well, when you account for the time difference, his dog actually died hours later. And that lesion on the mummy's cheek, that story was completely fabricated by a rival newspaper that was mad it didn't get exclusive access. As for Lord Carnarvon himself, the poor guy was already in very bad health. In a world before antibiotics, a simple infected bug bite was often a death sentence. And here's where science gives us a very real and very non-supernatural explanation. In sealed-up ancient tombs, toxic molds can grow. Spores from fungi like this one can cause severe respiratory infections when they're inhaled. So a lot of those mysterious fevers that plagued early explorers were probably caused by something biological, not supernatural. But the real nail in the coffin for this whole myth comes from a modern study. Researchers tracked the 25 people who were actually there when the tomb was unsealed. Now, you'd think they all died young, right? Wrong. Their average age of death was 73, which was actually a little bit longer than the average person of their time. But if you need one last piece of proof, let's just use some simple logic. If the curse of the pharaohs was real, who would be target number one? Who should have been the very first person to die? Think about the people who were the most involved. Lord Carnarvon's daughter, Lady Evelyn, was one of the very first people to step inside. She lived to be 78. The doctor who actually performed the autopsy on the mummy lived to be 87. And then, of course, there's the main man himself, Howard Carter, the man who literally broke the seal, the one who disturbed the pharaoh more than anyone. He lived for another 16 years, eventually dying of natural causes in 1939. He outlived all the hype by nearly 2 decades. For the rest of his life, you can bet reporters hounded him about the curse. And for years, his answer was always patient, simple, and the perfect takedown of the entire legend he accidentally helped create. You know, there's this really beautiful ancient Egyptian idea that you only truly die when your name is spoken for the last time. For 3,000 years, nobody said the name Tutankhamun. He was forgotten. So in the end, Howard Carter didn't unleash a curse of death. He gave a lost boy king the one thing every pharaoh dreamed of: immortality.